Sign here, and in 90 days, you walk away with $50,000. She slid the paper across the table, like it was a grocery receipt. I looked at it. I looked at her, then I looked at my hands still chalky from the drywall dust I'd been grinding into cracks all morning in a house 3 blocks away. My thumbnail had a split in it that hadn't healed right in 2 weeks. The contract was 4 pages, single-spaced, printed on paper that cost more than my lunch. I didn't sign that night. I drove home, made grilled cheese for my daughter, helped her with a worksheet about state capitals, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time thinking about $50,000. My name is Danny Kowalczyk. I'm a drywall contractor. I run a 2-man operation out of a white Chevy Express with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I've been meaning to fix for 3 years. My partner Reggie handles the mudding. I do the hanging and the finish work. We're not fancy. We're not slow. We show up when we say we'll show up, which in the trades apparently makes us rare. My daughter's name is Fiona. She was 7 at the time all of this happened. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that sounds like she's surprised by it every time. Her mother and I split when Fiona was 4. It wasn't dramatic. It was just slow and quiet and sad in the way that some things end. Not with a fight, but with 2 people who stopped reaching for each other and didn't notice until there was too much space to cross. She moved to Portland. Fiona stayed with me. That was the agreement, and it's held. We do holidays in shifts. Fiona calls her mom every Sunday. I don't have any bitterness left about it. I used to. But bitterness is expensive, and I got a kid to feed. So, that's me. I met Renata Breck on a Tuesday in October. Her company had bought a brownstone in Lincoln Park to convert into executive office space. High ceilings, original millwork, the kind of bones that make contractors want to slow down and do things right. The GC on the job was a guy named Phil Hennessy, who I'd worked with twice before. He called me in because the previous drywall crew had walked off after a disagreement about scope, and they were already 2 weeks behind. Phil walked me through the damage, some botched repairs on the 3rd floor, a hallway that needed to be rehung from scratch. And then his phone rang and he stepped outside, and I was standing alone in the main entry when she came down the stairs. I had no idea who she was. She was in work clothes, which meant a blazer over a t-shirt and pants that probably cost $800, but were cut to look like she didn't care. No jewelry except small gold hoops. Hair pulled back. She was looking at her phone, and she almost walked into me. She stopped, looked up, looked at my tool belt, my dusty jeans, the level I was holding. "You're the new drywall guy," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Phil said, "You were good." Phil's easy to impress. That got a real look from her. Not warmth exactly. More like she was recalibrating something. "What's wrong with the 3rd floor?" she asked. I told her. She listened in a way most people don't. Not nodding along, not waiting for me to stop talking, just taking it in. When I finished, she said, "How long to do it right?" 3 days. Maybe 4 if we find anything behind the walls. "You'll find something," she said. "There's always something." Then Phil came back in and she was gone. I didn't think about her again for 6 days. Then she was there on Friday when I was loading out and she asked if I wanted coffee. I thought she was being polite. I said, "Sure." She walked to the kitchen, which was the only finished room in the building apparently, and came back with 2 mugs and sat on a sawhorse and asked me what I thought about the space. I told her what I actually thought, which was that whoever had started the demo had gotten overexcited and taken out a load-bearing partition, and that someone had covered it up with a temporary column that wasn't rated for it, and that she should have an engineer look at it before anyone signed off on occupancy. She was quiet for a second. "Nobody told me that," she said. "Maybe they didn't see it, or maybe they didn't want to tell me." She looked at the ceiling. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name. Not anger, not worry. More like the particular exhaustion of someone who has learned not to be surprised when people disappoint them. "I'll send an engineer Monday," she said. I nodded, finished my coffee, said goodnight. I was halfway to my truck when she called after me. "Do you always say the thing that might cost you the job?" I thought about it. "I try to," I said. "Saves time." I found out later who she was. Renata Breck, 41 years old. CEO of Breck Capital, a private equity firm that managed something in the neighborhood of $4 billion in assets. Her father had started it. She'd taken over at 34 and tripled the portfolio in 6 years. There were 2 profiles of her in business magazines that I found by accident while I was Googling something else. In both photos, she looked like she was about to say something that would rearrange your whole understanding of the room. I didn't Google her on purpose. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of person who Googles people. But Reggie saw me staring at my phone and read over my shoulder and said, "Is that the woman from the Lincoln Park job?" And I said yes, and he said, "Danny, that woman has more money than God's accountant." And I said, "I know," and he said, "You're in trouble," and I said, "I'm not in anything." And he laughed for about 4 minutes. Reggie's known me since we were 19. He's not wrong often. She called my cell on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the job wrapped. Fiona was asleep. I was on the couch with a bowl of cereal watching a documentary about deep-sea fish, which is the kind of thing I watch when no one can judge me for it. She said she had a situation. She said it was unusual. She said she needed someone she trusted and that she knew she didn't know me well, but that she'd had me checked out and she thought I was someone who could be trusted. I said I didn't know whether to be flattered or alarmed. She said, "I need to get married." I said nothing. She said, "For legal reasons that would take an hour to explain, I need to be legally married before December 15th. It's a trust provision my father put in the original documents. I turn 42 in January. The provision lapses if I'm unmarried at 42. She paused. "I know how this sounds. It sounds like a movie," I said. "I know, a bad one. I know that too." I asked her why she didn't just, and she stopped me and said she'd thought of everything I was about to suggest, and none of it worked, and the attorneys had been over it for months, and this was the only way. A legal marriage. 90 days minimum to satisfy the provision. Then a quiet dissolution. "I'll pay you $50,000, she said. 30 up front, 20 when the dissolution is filed. I looked at the deep-sea fish on my television. One of them had a light on its head. It was using the light to lure smaller fish close enough to eat them. "I have a daughter," I said. "I know. She's 7. Her name is Fiona. She goes to Burley Elementary." I sat up. "I told you. I had you checked out. I didn't know how I felt about that. I still don't entirely. She'd need to know I'm around," I said. "Whatever this is, whatever it looks like. I'm not disappearing for 90 days. "I'm not asking you to disappear," she said. "I'm asking you to move in, both of you." The deep-sea fish opened its mouth very wide. "I'll send the paperwork tomorrow," Renata said. "Read it. Call me either way." I read it 3 times. Then I called my sister Kathleen in Cleveland because she's the only person I know who can read legal language without her eyes glazing over. She'd done 2 years of law school before she switched to accounting, and she reads contracts like other people read mystery novels, with this hungry focus turning pages as fast. She called me back an hour later. "It's real," she said. "It's airtight. The provision is real. The trust is real. The whole thing is real. Is it legal?" What she's asking. "Legally marrying someone for a finite period for financial consideration." Kathleen made a sound. "Danny, people do this for green cards every day. It's legal if you don't commit fraud about it. The dissolution has to be genuine, but the marriage can be whatever the 2 parties agree it is." "She's very rich," I said. "I know. I Googled her after you called. Everyone keeps Googling her, Danny. Are you going to do it?" I looked at the photo on my nightstand. Fiona at 5, at the lake up near Kenosha, holding a fish she'd caught that was honestly too small to be proud of, but she was so proud, squinting into the sun. Delighted. $50,000 was a year of daycare debt wiped out. It was Fiona's college fund actually existing. It was the dent in the van fixed and 6 months of breathing room and maybe a real vacation somewhere with a beach. "I don't know," I said. "You do," Kathleen said. "Or you would have said no already. We got married on a Thursday at the Cook County Clerk's office on Clark Street. Renata wore a gray wool coat. I wore my only suit, which I'd bought for a cousin's wedding in 2019 and hadn't touched since. It still fit, which felt like a minor miracle. The officiant was a county clerk named Darius, who had the energy of a man who had witnessed 17 ceremonies that morning and would witness 11 more before lunch. He read the words. We said the words. I signed. She signed. The whole thing took 9 minutes. Outside on the sidewalk, she handed me a key card for a building on North Dearborn and said the movers would be at my apartment Saturday morning. I said I'd be there. She started walking toward a waiting car. "Renata," I said. She turned. Do we shake hands or something? She looked at me for a moment. Something passed through her face that she didn't show for very long. I'll see you Saturday, she said. Her building had a doorman named George who greeted me like I was expected, which I was, but still felt strange. The apartment was on the 14th floor, and it was the kind of place that didn't show off because it didn't have to. Clean lines, high windows, a view of the lake that on a clear day went all the way to nothing. Fiona walked in, looked around, and said, "Are those real plants?" There were plants along the window, big ones, the kind that need actual attention. "I think so," I said. "How does she keep them alive?" "She probably has someone who does it." Fiona processed this for a moment. Then she said, "Can I have the room with the window seat?" She got the room with the window seat. The first week was quiet in the way that an empty theater is quiet. Not peaceful, just waiting. Renata left early and came home late. When she was home, she was in her office or on calls. She ate dinner standing at the kitchen island, reading something on her phone. I cooked for Fiona and made enough for 3 out of habit, and the first time I left a plate in the oven for Renata, she came out at 9 o'clock, found it, ate it at the counter, and didn't say anything. The next morning she said, "That was good." "The soup, minestrone," I said. "My grandmother's recipe." "Was she Italian?" "Polish grandmother who learned from an Italian neighbor." "It's a long story." Renata almost smiled. "Everything about you is a long story." I didn't know what to say to that, so I poured her coffee and left it on the counter and went to get Fiona up for school. Fiona took to the situation with the specific adaptability of children, which is to say she didn't explain it to herself too hard and just lived inside it. She decided Renata was interesting. She made this determination based on the fact that Renata owned 3 fountain pens and knew the names of all her plants in Latin, and had once apparently climbed a mountain in Patagonia, which Fiona felt was the most impressive thing she'd ever heard. She started finding reasons to be in the kitchen when Renata was there. She would bring drawings. She would show Renata things on her tablet, a video about octopuses, a stop-motion movie she'd made with her friend Maya at school. Renata would look. Really look. Not the halfway paying attention that adults do when kids show them things. She would ask questions. "What made you choose that color?" "How did you get the dog to stay still?" Fiona, who is discerning about adults in the way that children who've been through upheaval tend to be, decided that Renata was acceptable. Then she decided she was good. I watched all of this from doorways and kitchen corners and didn't say anything. About 5 weeks in, a pipe under the kitchen sink started leaking. I found it on a Saturday morning when I went to get the dish soap. It wasn't bad yet, just a slow seep, the kind that becomes a problem if you let it go. I found the shutoff, assessed it, drove to the hardware store on Milwaukee, and fixed it in about 45 minutes. Renata came in while I was cleaning up under the sink and stood in the doorway and said, "I would have called someone." "It's just a compression fitting," I said. "Took longer to find parking." She watched me put the toolbox away. "You fixed the towel bar in the hall bathroom too," she said. "It was loose. I had the drill out." She was quiet for a second. "You don't have to do that. I mean, the contract doesn't." "Renata," I stood up. "The towel bar was loose. It bothered me. I fixed it. It's not a thing." She looked at me like she was trying to read the subtext and finding there wasn't any. For someone who moved in the world she moved in, I think that was unusual. There was a dinner party in week 6. Her colleagues, her board members, people from her world. I wore the suit again and stood in a room where the conversations were about portfolio companies and basis points and liquidity events, and I understood about 40% of it. Her colleagues were polite to me with the specific politeness that is actually a form of dismissal. I recognized it. It's the same way certain homeowners talk to contractors. Friendly surface, no actual interest in what's underneath. There was one man, Garrett Price, who ran something in Chicago real estate, and he asked me what I did 3 times over the course of the evening. Not because he forgot, because every time I said drywall contractor, he seemed to expect me to follow it with something else, something that made it make sense. I didn't. Renata, across the room, caught my eye once. I didn't make a face or signal anything. I just nodded. She nodded back. It was the whole conversation. Later, after everyone had gone, she and I sat at the kitchen island, and she poured 2 glasses of something and said, "How was that?" "Educational," I said. She laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh for real. Not a polite sound, an actual laugh. It surprised her. "Garrett asked me afterward if you were a project," she said. "A project, his word. He thought I was," she paused. "He has a theory about me, that I collect things. Are you going to tell me he's wrong?" She looked at her glass. "He's not entirely wrong. I do like things that are well-made and underestimated." She said it like she was reading it off a page, clinically. "But that's not what this is. What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet," she said. And she seemed to mean it. Fiona got sick in week 7. Nothing scary. A fever, a sore throat, the kind of school illness that cycles through every winter. But she was miserable. And when Fiona is miserable, she wants to be held. And I spent most of Thursday on the couch with her watching animated movies and listening to her breathe through her mouth. I didn't hear Renata come home. I just looked up at some point and she was standing in the hall in her coat, briefcase in hand, looking at the two of us. Fiona had fallen asleep against my shoulder. The movie was still going. Renata didn't move for a moment. Then she set down her briefcase, took off her coat, hung it up, and came into the living room. She sat in the armchair across from us. She didn't turn on her phone. She just sat there, in the dim light of the TV, watching Fiona sleep. I don't know how long we sat like that. Eventually, I said quietly, "She'll be fine by Monday." Renata nodded. "She sleep like that? Easy?" "Once she's out, she's out. She could sleep through a tornado." Renata looked at Fiona's face. Something in her expression was very still. "I had a younger brother," she said. "He died when I was 23. Car accident. I didn't say I'm sorry, I just let it sit there. He had that," she said, "that thing, where you go easy." She stopped. "I haven't talked about him in a long time. You don't have to talk about him now, I know." She looked at the TV. "I wanted to, I think." After Fiona went to bed, Renata and I stayed in the living room. We talked for 3 hours, not about the trust provision or the contract or any of it. We talked about her father, who had died 2 years ago, and who she missed in a way she still hadn't found the right size for. We talked about my mother's kitchen in Wicker Park, how she made beet soup every January, how the smell of it still did something to me. We talked about the mountain in Patagonia. It took 4 days, and she said the last day she cried twice from exhaustion and wouldn't take that trip off her life for anything. I told her about my ex-wife, not bitterly, just the facts of it, the way things trail off. She listened. I told her about the night Fiona was born, and how I'd driven to the hospital in February through a sleet storm going 40 miles an hour on the expressway, both hands on the wheel, praying out loud to no one in particular. How when I first held her she was 7 pounds and made a sound like a question, and I said, out loud, in front of the nurses, okay, I got you," like she needed reassurance, like she needed to know I was going to be there. Renata said, "Did you know then? Know what? That was going to be the organizing thing, your whole life." I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I think I knew it in the car, actually. On the expressway, in the sleet." She was quiet. "I've never had that," she said. "An organizing thing. I've had goals, targets, benchmarks." But not. She shook her head. "What? Something you'd drive 40 miles an hour in a sleet storm for?" I looked at her. "You have time," I said. She looked away. "Maybe." Day 78. Her assistant called me. Apparently this was a thing that happened now. Renata's assistant calling me, and said that Renata had asked if I could bring Fiona to a thing on Saturday. A friend of Renata's was hosting a lunch, casual, on the North Shore. Kids would be there. I said sure. It was the first time I'd seen her in a context that wasn't work or the apartment. She was different outside, slightly less armored. She stood in the backyard of a big house in Winnetka, and talked to people, and laughed, and at one point found Fiona trying to catch frogs at the edge of a pond and crouched down next to her in her good pants and helped. I watched from across the yard. A woman beside me, one of the friends, I think her name was Deborah, followed my gaze and said, "She's wonderful with kids, you know. She never talks about it, but she's wonderful with them." I said I'd noticed. "She doesn't let many people in," Deborah said. "Not as a warning, just as information." "I know," I said. Deborah looked at me. "You're the first person she's brought to one of these in 6 years." I didn't say anything. Across the yard, Renata and Fiona were conferring over something cupped in Fiona's hands. Fiona held it up to show her. Renata leaned in, looked, and her whole face changed. Day 89. We were on day 89 when she knocked on my bedroom door at 11 at night. I said, "Come in." She stood in the doorway in a sweatshirt and socks, no armor, just Renata. "The dissolution paperwork is ready," she said. "The attorneys can file Monday." I said, "Okay." She didn't move. "You'd get the second payment Tuesday." 20,000, I said I understood. She was quiet for a long moment. "Fiona asked me today if we were going to stay," she said. "She didn't ask you?" "No. Why do you think she asked me?" I looked at her. "Because she already knows what I'd say." Renata's face did something complicated. "What would you say?" I looked at her for a long time. "I'd say that wasn't part of the deal," I said, "and that I stopped thinking about the deal a while ago, and that I don't know what to do with that." She stepped into the room, sat on the edge of the chair by the door. "I built something," she said. "Everything I have. I built it. I know how to build things." She looked at her hands. "I don't know how to." She stopped. Started again. "There are nights I sit in my office at 9 o'clock and I can see exactly what the next 10 years look like. The acquisitions, the exits, the projections, and I think, this is it, this is the whole thing." I waited. "And then I come home," she said, "and there's soup in the oven. And Fiona showed me a video about migratory birds. And you fixed the thing under the sink, and I think." She stopped again. "What?" I asked. "I think. What if there's a different 10 years?" The room was very quiet. "I'm a drywall contractor," I said, not as an apology, just as a fact she should have in front of her. "I know what you are," she said. "My van needs a new transmission, Danny. I'm serious. The estimate was $2,200 and I've been, Danny." She said it quietly. I know all of it. I'm not asking you to be something different. I'm asking you if you want to stay." I looked at my hands, same hands as always. Chalky creases, split thumbnail, finally healed. I thought about the expressway in the sleet, both hands on the wheel. The thing you drive toward when the thing matters. "Yeah," I said. "I want to stay. We told Fiona in the morning. I made pancakes because that's what you do." Fiona came to the table, still mostly asleep, hair in her eyes, dragging her blanket. Renata sat across from her. Fiona looked back and forth between us. "What happened?" she said. "Not a question, just recognition." "We talked last night," I said, "about staying." Fiona regarded her blanket, then she regarded Renata. "Are you going to make Dad fix more things?" she asked. Renata said, "Constantly." Fiona nodded. "Okay." She reached for the syrup. "Can we get a dog?" "I'm not telling you this story because it ended perfectly. I'm telling you because it ended true. Renata and I are not the same kind of people. She moves in rooms I'll never fully understand. I come home with dust in my hair and calluses that don't go away. We have had arguments about things both important and stupid. There are mornings she's on calls before I've made coffee, and evenings I don't get home until 7, and Fiona has been at aftercare since 3. It's not a fairy tale. It's a Tuesday. It's a Sunday. It's a transmission finally getting fixed because she called the shop and said do it, and I argued and then didn't. Last month, Fiona came home with a project for school, a family tree. She'd drawn it herself in colored pencil, very carefully, the way she does things when they matter to her. She'd drawn me on one side and her mom in Portland on the other. And in the middle, slightly above, she'd drawn Renata. Connected by lines she'd drawn in red because red was the only color left that wasn't used up. I asked her why she put Renata in the middle. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Because she holds it together," she said. I looked at that drawing for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, next to the place where my ribs are, where things go when you want to carry them without setting them down.